Hi everyone, this is a lecture on finding sources. This assumes that you have some basic knowledge of finding scholarly sources using the Pierce Library databases. This is something you should have learned in English 101. Let's take a look at primary sources. So oftentimes we don't even distinguish between primary sources versus secondary sources, but for many papers and assignments, it's helpful to do so, to make a distinction. So when I say primary source, or when scholars say primary source, what they mean is an original or eyewitness account. Typically, this is some sort of source like a historical document, a work of art, a novel, a transcript, a diary, a journal entry. But sometimes the line is a little bit blurred between what a primary source is and what a secondary source is. A primary source in, say, a history class would be a historical document. It could be something like the Constitution, or it could be what somebody from that time period wrote down. It could be a first-hand account of, say, a battle, something like that. Then a secondary source would be somebody else analyzing that account, somebody else interpreting that account, say a historian or a scholar or a cultural critic. If you were writing a paper for an art history class, your primary source might be the painting itself, and your secondary source might be a scholar interpreting that painting or explaining that painting. If you were doing a project on an issue facing Pierce, an issue facing our campus, the primary source might be some sort of document from the department website. Say, for instance, you were researching some policies of the police department or the sheriff's office at Pierce. Your primary source might be a quotation from the website, from the sheriffs themselves. And your secondary source might be an article from the Roundup where somebody is interpreting the directive that the sheriff's department gave out. For a literature class, your primary source might be the novel, and your secondary source would be a scholar interpreting that novel. So again, speeches, interviews, videos, transcripts, diaries, somebody's tweet or somebody's post on social media, a law, a court case, emails, studies and statistics, polls, data, and websites are examples of primary sources. But some of these things that I just mentioned could also be secondary sources. So the context is going to be really important, right? Of course, you could have a website. For instance, there's a website called Victorian Web, which is all scholarly analysis of plays and texts and poems from the Victorian period. So you could have a website that is a secondary source. You could also have a website like a government website that serves as a primary source. So context is really important here. We also have secondary sources. So like I said, these are sources that interpret or analyze the primary source. So for example, any sort of scholarly article is typically a secondary source, although a scholarly article could also be a primary source if the scholarly article had facts or statistics or new information. Magazines, reports, newspapers, again, newspapers can go either way. You could read a newspaper article that is reviewing something or critiquing another primary source, or you could read a newspaper article that actually is the primary source, that offers first-person testimony from a witness or something like that. Like I said, some sources can be primary or secondary sources. We also have the category of scholarly sources. So this is the category that we deal with most of the time in academic classes. So you might not know the difference between primary and secondary, but you should have all heard of scholarly sources. So when people say scholarly sources, what they mean are peer-reviewed essays or articles that have been written by experts. And the peer review process takes several months, sometimes several years. They go through a rigorous vetting process. It doesn't mean that everything you read in a scholarly journal is correct, but it means that the person writing the article, sometimes it's written by several people, has been properly trained as an expert in that field. Written by professors, students, written for professors or students and researchers. So oftentimes the language will be academic. There might be some jargon that's really technical or very specific. These articles tend to be a little bit more difficult to digest. These will have extensive citations. So at the end of a scholarly article, you should see a gigantic works cited page. Oftentimes that works cited page is 3 or 4 pages long. You will also notice that your article might, or the article that you're reading, might be cited elsewhere too. So not only should the article have lots of citations in the works cited page, but the article itself might be cited by other scholars. These are articles that you access through the library or the library databases. So I'm going to always suggest that you go directly through the library databases to find these scholarly articles. Yes, you could use Google Scholar, but occasionally articles slip in there that really are not scholarly. So Google Scholar is a fine place to begin, but I recommend using the databases after that, or if you found an article that you really liked on Google Scholar, find that same article on the databases. Most of the time you can do that. The databases are going to help you kind of sift through and make sure that most of the material that you're looking at is scholarly and worthy of a college level essay. So you should know that you're looking at a scholarly essay because you found it on the databases, but there's also some visual clues. Look for words like journal or quarterly or review. Of course, you could find something just by Googling that has the word review in it or quarterly and is non-scholarly, right? Is written by a crazy person on the internet. So these are just hints that it's going to be scholarly. It doesn't necessarily mean that because it has the word journal stamped on it, that it's going to be something official, right? Like if it says New England Journal of Medicine, that's probably a good indicator that it is. But look for those words, but make sure you verify that it's a scholarly source. These should have little to no advertising. This is because they don't make their money through advertising to you because you already pay for the service. So when you are reading your article, you should not see a lot of advertisements or pop-ups because you as a Pierce student have paid for Pierce as part of your tuition. You've paid for Pierce to access or subscribe to these databases. So there should be little to no advertising. The articles themselves should actually look quite boring. Like I said, originally most of these articles come from print journals, so they should look quite kind of boring and dry. They should use standard academic format like MLA format or APA format or maybe even Chicago format. The format should look pretty dry and boring. And books are, I'm going to call books scholarly for this class or for any other class. And also ebooks that you access through EBSCO, those I will count as scholarly too, and most teachers will. Here are some examples of databases that you can use. So you know from English 101 that databases are like big containers for articles, and Pierce subscribes to hundreds of different databases. And like I said, you pay for this as part of your tuition. If you just try to go to a database like JSTOR or ERIC or Academic Search Complete just through Google, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit a paywall because it does not know that you are a student, that you've already paid for these as part of your tuition. So you want to make sure you access these through the library first, through the library website first. So go to the library website. There are several ways you can do it. You could try doing something called OneSearch, which sifts through several databases at once. Or even better, go to where it says pick databases A through Z. And if you know of a certain database that you like I really like Academic Search Complete. I also like JSTOR for literature classes. You could start by searching that particular database, or you could search by subject. So if you were writing a paper or writing a proposal about a controversial issue, you could click the subject guide for controversial issues. If you were writing a paper for a literature class, click the subject guide for literature class. For math classes, same thing. For most disciplines at Pierce, your librarians have given you a list of databases that are really specific to that particular discipline. So not just for this class, but for any class, pick the subject guide that kind of matches what you're talking about, right? So if you're writing about something controversial, pick controversial issues, or you could pick communications, or you could pick political science. Sometimes you can find it in kind of adjacent or very similar disciplines or subjects. Again, some examples of databases that I like. Academic Search Complete, that's a really good, just general interdisciplinary database. JSTOR is a great one. CQ Researcher, Communication and Mass Media Complete. Those are some other ones that work nicely for when you're writing about a controversial topic. I've included a link to the library website, but that should be pretty easy to find. It's also on our course homepage. As you know, when you get to the library website, it's going to ask you to include your student ID and password, which is a combination of your birthday. I like to start off broad when I'm searching for something and then get more specific. Remember, these databases don't run exactly like Google, so you want to use quotation marks to glue certain terms together. For instance, if you were looking for an article about a free speech zone on college campuses, you might put free speech in quotation marks to glue free and speech together. Unlike Google, it doesn't necessarily guess what you're trying to say. You can get fancy and use Boolean operators like and or nor or not, or I'm not really fancy when I do it. I just search for key terms and just kind of use trial and error. You don't have to read every article you come across because then you'd be reading millions of articles. You might skim through titles, read abstracts, that's a very short summary at the beginning of an article, see if it's worth your time. And of course, you can email the articles to yourself, you can bookmark them, and you can use that really handy feature that says Cite For Me, where it will cite the article for you in MLA format. And while those used to be very unreliable, I find that lately the little Cite For Me button, if you click MLA format, the most recent edition, I found that lately it's pretty accurate. Obviously, double check it with OWL Purdue or an MLA handbook. Make sure that your indentation is correct when you cut and paste it into your own works cited page, but I think it's pretty effective. It makes our lives so much easier. And then, of course, you can always get help from a librarian. Things are going to be a little bit different this semester since the physical library is not open, but the librarians are working at home. So you can schedule virtual appointments with them. You can send them emails, and they're constantly having tutorials or offering services where you can chat with a librarian in California at another California community college, even if it's at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night. So I hope that helps you find sources for any essay that you're going to write from this point forward in this class. And I hope now you understand the differences between primary and secondary sources. Good luck researching.